In Tolkien's universe, death is not the end. Not for men whose spirits go beyond the world, not for elves who have a chance to reincarnate in the Undying Land, and not for the Ainur, who could regenerate brand new bodies. Nobody had more experience with this than Sauron, because across Tolkien's stories, Sauron was no stranger to death, dying not just once, twice, but even 3 times. So in this video, we explain Sauron's 3 deaths, what happened, how did it change Sauron, and how was he able to come back twice? Now before I get any comments, I will say, yes, Sauron cannot be destroyed, he's an immortal spirit, but that does not mean he can't be killed, because in Tolkien's universe, death is the separation of spirit and body, because the spirit is indestructible. Going by this definition, Sauron has been killed on 3 separate occasions, once during the downfall of Numenor, once during the War of the Last Alliance, and a 3rd and final time during the War of the Ring. But despite coming back twice, these deaths had some very real consequences for Sauron, forcing him to change the way he operated. Let's talk about Sauron's first death, during the downfall of Numenor. Funnily enough, this was something of an own goal by Sauron. After being captured by Ar-Pharazôn and his Númenóreans, Sauron was taken to Numenor, where he quickly managed to corrupt most of the kingdom with the help of the One Ring. As Ar-Pharazôn neared his own death, Sauron convinced him to lead an army to Valinor and to seize immortality. This was, of course, a lie. Sauron was still vindictive about being humiliated by the king, and wanted to see him go to his certain death. Unfortunately for Sauron, Ilúvatar's response to the Númenóreans breaking the ban of the Valar was greater than he imagined. Numenor was drowned beneath the ocean, and Sauron was killed by the wave that engulfed his temple. Sauron's spirit did escape the destruction, and more importantly, his spirit was able to bear the One Ring back to Mordor. Speaking of the One Ring, this may have played an important role in Sauron's survival here. In all our other examples of Maiar dying, Saruman, Gandalf, the Balrogs, the Maiar seemingly didn't have the ability to reform by themselves, at least not that easily. Gandalf had to be re-embodied by Ilúvatar, Saruman clearly had no power left, and the Balrogs never returned. To be fair, Sauron was more powerful than those others, but we're still not sure whether he would have had the power to re-embody himself if not for the One Ring. The One Ring acted almost like a phylactery here. It contained most of Sauron's power, and while it existed, it effectively anchored him to the world. If not for the One Ring, it's possible that Sauron would not have been able to return at all. But thanks to the One Ring, Sauron could return almost immediately, re-embodying himself in Mordor. However, the death did leave him weakened, and his strength still hadn't fully returned by the time of the War of the Last Alliance a little over 100 years later, which might explain why he was able to be killed despite using the One Ring. The death at the downfall of Numenor also robbed Sauron of one of his greatest assets, his ability to take on a fair form, which had allowed him to deceive the elves and the Númenóreans. Now, Sauron was left in his true form, that of a Dark Lord, terrible to look upon, an imposing figure that was larger than a man, yet not gigantic. Because of this, when using diplomacy, Sauron now had to rely entirely on emissaries, rather than going forth himself. It would not be long before Sauron would suffer his next death. In 3429, the War of the Last Alliance started when Sauron's forces invaded Gondor, but Sauron's success was limited, and after a major defeat at the Battle of Dagorlad in 3434, Sauron and his remaining forces would be besieged in Barad-dûr. In 3441, his supplies dwindling, Sauron would personally sally forth, and would briefly drive back the forces of the Last Alliance. At Mount Doom, Sauron would duel both Elendil and Gil-galad, and while he managed to slay the 2 High Kings, he himself was mortally wounded, and he lived just long enough for Isildur to cut the One Ring from his hand. This death was a lot more damaging to Sauron on both a physical and a spiritual level. Coming so soon after his first death, Sauron hadn't had the time to recover his strength, so this death left him with little native power. We can say for sure that at this point, without the One Ring, Sauron would not have been able to exist. Later events would prove this theory entirely correct. And speaking of the One Ring, this was lost to Sauron. His spirit either lacked the strength to save it, or could not save it because Isildur had already taken it into his possession, or more likely a combination of both. After this death, Sauron's spirit fled into the east, where he spent 1,000 years recovering his strength. We're not sure what exactly recovering his strength entailed. It's possible that during this time, Sauron was so weak that he could not even take a physical form. It's possible that he was so weak that he couldn't meaningfully interact with anything at all. After all, Sauron did not start once again influencing events until this 1,000 year period was over. Either way, it was probably an agonizing time for Sauron, and it allows us to understand why Sauron was so cautious when he returned. The very earliest Sauron seems to have recovered his form was in the year 1050 of the Third Age. This is when the shadow first falls on Greenwood, the earliest signs of the shadowy figure that would become known as the Necromancer. It was at this time when Sauron started influencing things once again, although he was very careful to conceal his own involvement, and to not give any clues as to what the true nature of the Necromancer was. His lack of confidence in his own strength was apparent in 2063, when Gandalf investigated Dol Guldur. Sauron avoided any confrontation and instead fled into the east, where he would remain for 400 years. He did the same in 2941, fleeing from the White Council and returning to Mordor. By this time, we're certain that Sauron had recovered a physical form. When Gollum is being tortured in Barad-dûr, he does see Sauron, noting that one of his burned hands has only 4 fingers. This really shows how far Sauron has fallen in terms of native strength. He took many years to reform, and even when he did reform, his new body still had injuries from old battles. This was the only time someone would see Sauron in the flesh. He spent the last few decades of the Third Age holed up in Barad-dûr, managing events from afar. During the War of the Ring, Sauron would suffer his third and final death. Knowing that the Free Peoples cannot succeed militarily against Sauron, Gandalf comes up with the risky plan of destroying the One Ring by casting it into the fires of Mount Doom. Against all odds, the quest succeeds. As I said earlier, Sauron's ability to take a new form was reliant on the One Ring at this point, as it contained most of his power. Even though he had recovered a little bit, without the existence of the One Ring, Sauron could not hold on to a physical form. So when the One Ring was destroyed, Sauron immediately dies, and all of his works that relied on the power of the One Ring, such as Barad-dûr, were destroyed. When the One Ring was destroyed, Sauron rose as a massive shadow in the sky, crowned in lightning, his hand outstretched towards the captains of the West. This was all for show. Sauron had no true power left here, and his shadow was then blown away by a wind coming from the west. With this third death, Sauron's spirit was left entirely impotent, and was now well beyond recovery. He could only now exist as a menacing shadow, a whisper of malice, something that could make your skin crawl, but wasn't truly able to harm you. Tolkien would confirm in his writings that this would be the last demonic threat that Middle-earth would face, so while the evil of Sauron remained behind, he himself was gone for good. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. I think this video draws attention to that while the One Ring may have ultimately ended up being Sauron's undoing, it also allowed him to survive far longer than he should have. And I think, rather amusingly, Sauron never intended for the One Ring to even be used that way, because he wasn't supposed to be defeated while he had it. Cheers, farewell, and remember, if you have died 3 times and are still watching this video, my first question is, congratulations, and my second is, what are you even doing?